Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to Parent Chat. Tonight we're talking about cancel culture, which, unless you're hiding under a rock somewhere, you've heard of this in the media. You probably heard your kids talking about it. And we thought it would be important to bring someone on so we can really discuss how this is affecting our kids and their development. We know how it's affecting celebrities, of course, but it actually does trickle down into the halls of middle school and high school, probably elementary school, who knows, definitely in college. And so we're going to talk about the repercussions of this thing that's come up called cancel culture. We'll talk about what it is and what we need to do to help our kids to kind of live in this day and age where there's cancel culture. So first, I wanted to stop for a moment and just get grounded, because I know we all have hectic days and hectic lives. We're not going to do a full-blown meditation, but I just want to take a moment so that we can have a moment of silence, if you will, to get grounded, take a few deep breaths. I know last parent chat I had this cool visual, but I couldn't get that to download this time. So I'm just going to ask everyone to close their eyes or look at the floor, whatever makes you comfortable. And we're going to just take a solid 60 seconds to just breathe. Okay, everyone, I think that was close to 60 seconds. I didn't put on my timer or anything, but I don't know about for you, but that felt good for me because I was scarfing down dinner before I sat down to do this and getting tech to work. So it's nice to kind of get my heart rate back under control and to just sit here and be in the moment with all of you. So tonight we're talking about cancel culture, as I said, and we are, make sure I get my slides to work. For those of you who are new to Parent Chat, my name is Coach Sherry Gazit. My kids all went through like Washington School District. They're older now, 18, 21, and 23, made it through those ages. But I'm here because I really believe in what Balance in Mind is all about, which is bringing mental health and resources to the forefront and having parents have a place to come and talk about things and learn about things together. And just, we need to support each other. There's a lot going on, right? And then our guest tonight is Joe Lankford. Some of you may have heard him speak around the community, but also he's come to Parent Chat as well as an expert. And he's just a therapist. He works with kids. He hears from the front lines what's going on. So he has a lot to add to the conversation. So welcome, Joe. You can go ahead and come on screen so we can see you. There we go. So Joe, do you want to share some slides with us, or do you just want to have a conversation about this and talk about what's going on?
I'm going slideless tonight. It's just me they have to stare at.
I love that. All right, let me stop sharing here so that we can see you better. Awesome. Okay. Perfect. So let's just start with cancel culture. Like, what is cancel culture? We hear this word thrown around a lot. What do we mean by it in the general world? And then we'll bring it down to the kid level.
Well, I mean, to cancel something at its most basic is to like draw negative attention to a behavior, like an offensive remark or an unforgivable action, and then kind of reject the person responsible through blocking or unfollowing, calling them out on social media. Basically, it's like an online version of a boycott.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody says something that might be construed as inappropriate or racist or sexist or something along those lines, then the masses kind of, hey, did you see that this person said this? Start sharing that through YouTube or social media or whatever. Right. And the main purpose is it to discredit them, to make them irrelevant? Like, what's the purpose?
I think the main idea is withdrawing attention or support of that person or a business or whatever, because they've done something that you don't agree with. Like, I mean, that idea is not new. We've been doing that since the beginning of time as creatures, but calling people out via social media is sort of like a new version of this. And it's been kind of going full steam, like since, probably for about 10 years, has been this idea about using social media to call things out. But the specific term cancel culture has only been around for probably 4 years, something like that, not as long, because it's so efficient, and you can get so much done so quickly with social media, in good ways and bad ways.
Yeah.
Cancel culture isn't just for like famous people with massive followings and influence anymore. It's made its way into the larger community and certainly into youth culture. And so, a lot of parents and kids, are worried about how it's going to affect them and their families, right?
Right. Yeah.
So tonight, I just want to talk about like what is our role and responsibility as parents in supporting kids if this happened in your family.
Right. Can I ask you, like, what do you think the messaging is, like the values, just all of that around cancel culture? Like, what are we teaching our kids when we're saying this is something that you can do, or that, just adults are doing to each other? Like, what are we teaching them?
Well, I mean, so there's good messages in there and there's bad messages in there. And I want to talk about both of those tonight. Like, cancel culture can seem really negative, but the bigger concept can actually bring around really positive changes, I think, in real life. Like, big picture, it's humans coming together, using technology to join together and rally against the normalization of things that are not okay, or that only used to be okay. Common things are like racism, sexism, phobic behavior, anti-climate stuff, anti-science stuff, irresponsible gun behaviors and policies. And I think, kind of most importantly, like rape culture plays into this a lot. And at least in my perspective, most of the time when I'm having to deal with this with clients or kids or schools, it's mostly around rape culture, but there's lots of reasons that someone would want to do this. It does, I don't really like the term cancel culture. I like the term accountability culture. I think that's better. We can cancel anything if we don't like it. That's like a personal preference, but accountability has more of like someone is actually being hurt or wronged tone to it. And I think that is kind of the basis of a lot of this, whatever we call it. I think, cancel culture is here, it's real, it's relevant, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. We have to kind of work to understand it, like get that it's out there and it could happen to anyone, and talk about it. Like, there can be abuses to it, but I think when you boil it down to the bones, ultimately, I think those kinds of things can benefit us as a species.
Yeah, I love the idea that you can't just say anything like crude, crass, racist, sexist, all that people are kind of keeping their eyes on each other. And so I love that, because that is empowering to say, we're not on board with what that comedian is saying or this meme that's going around, but there's also an interpretation to everything, right? And so somebody might say something, it's taken out of context, and then all of a sudden their whole person is canceled. And for a celebrity, they get through it, they move on. I know it impacts them too, their people. But when we bring it down to the school level, like, what are you seeing that's happening in the school level?
Well, I mean, I like what you said, right? It's like we are clearly living in a digital age now, and it's really important for people, especially kids, to understand, famously, like when I talk, like when kids first start out with social media and with their screens, they don't understand that the internet is forever, right?
Yeah.
I say that all the time. But everything that we do online can come back to haunt us, right? Everything is documented now. Like, there's some stat, like the average person in America is caught on video like 200 times a week, just like living their life, right? Like, it is getting harder and harder to hide crappy behavior, and people screw up and make mistakes. And when you're a famous person, it's easier to kind of be able to go back and fix it. But with kids, that can be a lot harder, right? If they get, canceled, it's harder for them to be able to get enough of a megaphone back where they can sort of explain themselves or create something new going forward, which is, I think, one of the great messages that we need to take away from this, right? You're going to screw up. It may come back and bite you in the ass Monday morning in math class. It may be 30 years when you're trying to run to be a senator or something. but it will come back to you, right? And so now, like the kids that we're talking about tonight, like these kids have a chance to understand, like, oh, if we can get them to understand like the internet is forever, then they can understand like, oh, if I do screw up, I need to go forward in a different way than I would have naturally. And that's what's happening with like the comedians and the senators for the most part, right? Like they didn't get that. Like they screwed up maybe years ago and they didn't leave what I call like the trail of breadcrumbs going forward, showing how they've changed and grown, and they're not that guy anymore, right? But so our kids have that gift with this. They understand like, oh, now my job is to show as I go forward through life that I'm not that guy, right?
I think one thing, if you think back to middle school, it's a time where the kids are learning about the world, learning about what racism is, sexism is, anti-Semitism, and they throw around jokes because they don't really know any better yet. They're trying it out. They're seeing, like, I heard somebody say this and it was supposed to be funny. I'm going to say this over here. And so they get caught in these, situations where they're doing things that as adults we're like, oh, that's reprehensible. It still is as a middle schooler, but they're still learning. So I find it's really scary as a parent, that you're like, oh my gosh, is my kid going to be canceled, caught doing something, even though they know better? It's kind of scary.
Yeah, because in the eyes of the masses, you now only represent that thing you were canceled for, right?
Yeah.
And so, and like you said, like the spectrum of cancelable offenses can be really huge. And like the accountability that I think it sets on people is admirable. And I'm really glad that people, especially people with less privilege, like can find a voice, especially when they band together and call crap out. It is unfortunate that it kind of reduces people to one sort of solitary act. And it can be harder for, a 15-year-old to be able to sort of create something new out of that. Those opportunities for improvement, I think, are kind of harder to find. And it can be really devastating to young people and their families when information comes out that they did, like their lives can be turned upside down, their reputations can be ruined. Like the social impact of it is almost always negative. I mean, I guess that's the point, right? But
yeah.
And so tonight I kind of want to talk a little bit about like what steps can be taken to minimize damage if that happens to people in their family.
All right, let's go there. Tell us, what do we need to do as parents?
Well, unfortunately, like I do deal with this sometimes, right? So when I talk to kids who, screw up, like there's a range of reasons that kids end up in my office seeking help. And so like when something goes wrong, I usually tell kids, like in the real world, like reaching out to a supportive adult, the parent, the school authority figure, right? When something negative happens is typically the best first step. But for a lot of kids, like they don't necessarily have the access or the patience, honestly, for that. And it can be just a lot easier for them to just like call somebody out on Instagram, right? And so ideally, I think, as parents, we've set the stage already with our kids. Like we've discussed ethical behavior and moral behavior. We've talked about what's okay and what's not okay. We shared our values and talked about, this is what our family considers inappropriate and where the line is that it crosses into inappropriate, right? We talk to our kids about privilege, about how substances can change your behavior and invite poor choices. We talk about consent and how like their deeds and their feeds, I call it, right? Like the things that they do in the world and the things that they do on their devices, how those things can impact and affect other people, right? Because being aware of those things can help prevent someone from crossing lines and eventually getting canceled, like we're talking about tonight. But it really can just take one small thing to be deemed cancel worthy. It moves really quickly. And once you're canceled, like Sherry was just saying, like it can be really hard to come back. And so if that happens, kids need to know first, primarily, that it's not everybody and it's not forever, right? Even though it really can feel like that to them in the moment. It is a moment. It's a moment that'll pass. It's a moment that is 100% something that a young person can recover from, with the exception of things that are like involve death or sexual assault or violence. Like targeted cancel strikes mostly fall into kind of two flavors, which is social justice or cyberbullying, right? Sometimes a little bit of both, but either way, they tend to burn really very hot and very bright. and then they kind of burn out pretty quickly as soon as like the next social bonfire comes around, right? And so part of the game is just helping kids to kind of ride that wave, and things tend to kind of pass. I guess one of the other things that I talk to parents about, like, even though a lot of times, like we talk about and we're thinking about tonight, like what happens if my kid is canceled, and what are the impact of those bonfires on our kids, I think it's also really important as parents for us to consider the possibility that our kids could be one of the torch wielding villagers, right? We all like to think of ourselves as the Katies, but sometimes we're the Regina, and it's really easy for kids to do that. And if you didn't get that, anybody, that was a Mean Girls reference. So if you have not watched that movie with your kid, please go do so. It's homework. It totally lines up with this discussion. It'll help you kind of springboard into a bunch of conversations that actually have quite a bit to do with tonight's topic. And plus, it rocks. It's such a good movie. So Mean Girls, put it on your list, make that happen this week. Just my little plug. But sorry, I digress. But, we just got to work to help our kids make sure that they're not canceling others, right? Reminding them that using your words is more humane. It's typically the best step. And because canceling makes it really difficult for the canceled to make any changes, right? It sort of takes away a big chunk of their chances to improve. If you're a famous movie director or a comedian or something, you're still going to have a voice out there that you can sort of try to get your message out, right? Look at Joe Rogan, right? But if you're 14 and in middle school, like it's really hard to do that, right? Plus, when people are called out for social media, most of the attention is put on the person who has like done the offending, but the person who has been offended is also part of that story, and we just continue to like spread their story around, creating more damage and more drama potentially for the person who was hurt in the first place, right? But anyway, kids do go bad viral sometimes with their behavior. I get a pretty steady stream of calls and emails from parents around this. And what I tell parents is initially, like I just said, kind of stand behind your kid, right? For whatever reason, your kid crossed somebody's line. They are probably embarrassed. They're probably ashamed. They might even be scared. Sometimes there's like legal consequences that are also involved, right? And so as parents, I'd say you just got to put your poker face on, swallow your judgments, and just be a safe place for them, right? That can be super hard to do in the moment, especially in situations like two that I had last week, where it involves like crime or behavior that like very clearly goes against your family's values, or a boundary issue that you weren't expecting from your child, which very often involves somebody being naked, right? And
Yeah.
Parents are sort of like shocked when this happens, right? Like they took a picture of their thing and sent it over there, or they took someone else's picture of their thing and sent it to the soccer team. And it crosses a line, and parents kind of get freaked out, right? And so I just remind them to breathe, right? Like, Sherry, your exercise was great. I actually needed it more than I thought I did tonight, but there will be time later to process their choices, to talk about boundaries, and the what the hell were you thinking conversations. Like, those can all happen later. Right now, you just need to be that safe place for this, right?
Right.
They need to know.
Let me say, Joe, as far as that, like standing behind them, you're not saying condone their behavior. You're just saying they need your support. They probably already know they screwed up big time, and they're already going through tons of emotions. So you're standing by them as a person, as your, son, daughter, and you're not saying good job. You're saying we're going to get through this and learn from it.
Exactly. You can support your kid without supporting their behavior, right? The other thing because that happens sometimes, right? Like parents sort of, go Papa Bear or Mama Bear, and they sort of dig their heels in and kind of side with their kids. And that's not always the best option. Sometimes kids really do cross some lines that shouldn't be crossed. But it also means alongside that is not to shield yourself. God, sorry, I'm so froggy tonight. Not shielding your kid from the natural consequences of their behavior, right? Which a lot of parents do, right? Zero parents want to see our kids screw up or be laughed at or ostracized or arrested, right? detention, get kicked out of school, but swooping in and shifting the blame or deflecting the consequences, especially if they've been earned, that really prevents the kid from learning a probably much needed life lesson. I think it thins their skin. It makes them less likely to handle the next thing that comes along. It stifles their maturity. And really, especially with boys, I see this all the time, it gives them this sort of inaccurate sense of invincibility or entitlement, or both, which is even worse. And it makes it much more likely that whatever screw up they did in the first place is going to happen again, right? So we don't need to like endorse their behavior, and we don't need to rescue them from the consequences when we do this. The appropriate response, if this happens with your kid, I say swift, same, and don't feed the flames, right? And so swift is, in most situations, time's kind of the essence, right? So best practices that I recommend to parents, it says putting a brief statement out, acknowledging the mistake, and a short apology. And if kids can do this within like 24 hours, that's really best. I think it shows an awareness and a level of responsibility. Typically, I recommend that kids get feedback from some kind of third-party adult who isn't like in it in the same way that they are, like a boss or a friend, an uncle, a therapist, right? Like I've helped people with that before. Someone who can be neutral and honest and prevent them from coming across as like flip or defensive or making the situation worse, right? But saying something about what's going on in most cases is a pretty good idea. So that's the swift part. The same part, I try to remind people, especially this seems to come up more in middle school and high school. If it was a 3-thread tweet that caused the problem, then a post on Instagram is not going to be good enough. If it was a 20-minute video rant on YouTube, then a tweet is not going to fix that situation, right? Don't apologize on TikTok for something that happened on Instagram. Like, kids need to stay in the same medium and give, I tell them, at least as much energy to the apology as to the offense itself. That is going to help get their message out to the people that need to hear it. And then the don't feed the flames part is last because it's the most important. Telling kids after that to unplug, like don't engage in flame wars on social media after they send that initial apology out. Make them unplug. Do not read the comments, right? Some people are going to support you, some are not. If we're all functioning adults here tonight, right, we understand that. So reading the rants of people who just want to jump in and pile on is not going to help anybody or do your kid or your family any good. And as parents, if that happens and you really don't think that you can help your kid respond without making the situation worse, then again, like find a third party who can help you do that. When something terrible hits the fan, it's way better to just unplug the damn fan than throw more terrible into the blades, right? It's only going to make the situation worse. Right. So that's kind of my sort of bullet point, like best practices. Swift, same, don't feed the flames.
Yeah, and the other thing about the comments, and a hard lesson to learn is if your kids do this, they don't feed the flames, but they apologize appropriately. It doesn't mean everybody has to say, oh, okay, you're right, we forgive you. Yep. There's still going to be people who are piling on, as you said. There's going to be people who are like, there's no excuse. There's people who are going to unfriend them, and that's okay. And that's where we as parents can come in and be like, you'll get through this. This is tough. I understand, but you're still the same person you were 3 weeks ago. This doesn't change who you are, yep. But it may change just some of the choices that you're making.
Yeah. And, there's power in apology. And it doesn't mean that it's a Band-Aid. It's not gonna stop the bleeding completely. It's not going to fix whatever wound has been done to whoever it's been done to. It's part of a process, right? And even like the process of apologizing is really complicated and very specific, I think, in a digital age. I have notes on that too. Like I talk to parents about how does one apologize in a digital age, right? And it's just different than it is when it's not online, and it's different than it was before, right? People are sort of more keen to what like a bad apology could do. Can I talk a little bit about that? Do we have time?
Yeah, please do.
So when helping anybody apologize for anything, right? This works in real life as well, but particularly if it's a kid and particularly if it's online, like helping your kid admit what they did, right? Not being afraid to say the words, right? I mean, if they use like the N word or something like that, you do not need to include that in the apology, right? But like slurs and stuff like that, but like, saying like, I'm sorry for what I did, or that thing that happened last week, that's not good enough. They need to be able to call out and say, this is what I did, this is who I wronged, I understand that, right? There's power in that. Sharing, so clearly like admitting what they did and then sharing what their feelings or thoughts about the impact that it had on other people, right? Whether it was a group of people or whether it was a specific person, to say, this is why I think it was like how it impacted that person, right? It's the empathy part, right? And typically the part where they say, I'm sorry. And then they need to kind of show even deeper than that, like an understanding of why exactly it was wrong, like what they've learned from the situation, how they've grown from the experience. It really goes a long way. And honestly, it's kind of even more important to say that than why they did it, right? People don't necessarily really care about that. Most people want to stick that in an apology because it kind of turns part of the apology into an excuse. But if you can leave that part out, like the why it happened, is usually a good thing. Mm-hmm. I tell people, to figure out how to make it right is kind of the next step. It is, a lot of people, when they do apologies, they try to ask for forgiveness, right? And so with kids, I say, it's not about asking the person that you've already hurt to do something for you. It's about explaining what you are going to do differently so that you can be the kind of person that one could forgive, right? And that's sort of like a paradigm shift that's really hard for a lot of kids.
I like this. I mean, even if we're not talking about doing a public apology for something, these steps are really important for our kids to learn, because their mistakes are a growth opportunity. Mm-hmm. Instead of just feeling shame or feeling bad about something they did. Like, even if there's sometimes they don't get caught, right? But they did something that they aren't proud of. This is something they can do in a journal or something where they can write down what they did wrong, admit it and be specific, share their thoughts, even though maybe it's with only themselves, on the impact that it might have had on others, why it was wrong, and what they plan to do differently in the future. So we as parents can use this methodology, not just as an apology to someone, but just as a process to learn from mistakes and to grow. So I love this. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, kids have to figure that out, right? It's not it's not like when they're little kids, they're not trying to like, get their video game privileges back or get out of trouble at home, right? Or be able to like finish their desserts and go back to the dinner table. Like, it's about accountability, and it's a different stance. It's a more sort of adult, real world stance than it was when they had to apologize for something as a little kid. And a lot of kids aren't going to autopilot into that, right? They're going to go at apologies the way they did when they were 6, because that's the practice that they've had. But with something serious happens, and it happened online, and it's gone viral, and your kid is being canceled now because of it, they have to respond in a way that shows maturity. And and then leaving that trail of breadcrumbs, right? Like, it's not about forgiveness, it's about making it right. And then their job, in fact, I think one of the most important jobs, especially for our boy identified kids when they cross a line, is to work and leave that trail of breadcrumbs. Like, that's your primary job growing into adulthood and beyond, right? Is being able to leave a trail so that you can refer back to it and say, look at the things that I've done and learned based on this experience that happened to me. I'm not that guy anymore, right? And I think that part is really important.
For sure. Yeah, I like that. What else do we need to cover, Joe?
What else do we need to cover? I think that, helping, so the other big things that come up is helping kids navigate, the stigma when this happens, right? A lot of kids just want to like change schools or move towns and, that kind of thing. But it's really, really critical that they stand their ground. Like socially speaking, I think the worst thing that they can do is isolate themselves. Continue to engage in their regular activities and their classes, not letting the posts or the paparazzi like terrorize them is really important. It's not always avoidable when something really bad happens. Like there have been times where kids aren't allowed back at school or they do need to kind of shift gears, but not, in terms of their own ability to sort of big picture weather storms and stay strong, like they need to just kind of stay in it. And if they need to focus on, the community-based soccer team that doesn't really have anything to do with their school, or, karate class or something like that, rather than the club at school, like, those things can happen. But it's really important that kids stay active, they stay connected to a peer group. They don't just like sit in their room and draw the shades, even though a lot of kids are going to want to do that.
Yeah, and that's hard to watch your kid kind of suffer, but it's important for them to learn that it is momentary, that they will get through it. If they kind of, like you're saying, if they just leave, they never have a chance to make it right with those people in that community. So it's almost like there's a shame then that's there because they weren't able to process through it as with the community and their friends.
Yeah, and we all do it, right? We can all think back to people in high school, and there's a lot of people that we probably can remember, and there's just like one specific thing we remember about them, good or bad or neutral or beige or whatever. But it's easy to reduce people that you don't know very well down to one solitary thing, and this is an example of that, right? I think in terms of parenting, right, if you haven't had those bigger picture conversations with your kid yet, like not only just like specific factual rules about who they communicate with and what they say online or how many Instagram accounts they have, like that kind of stuff, but the bigger picture stuff about talking about race, talking about class issues, talking about sexuality and gender, talking about privilege is huge, right? Again, especially for our boy identified people, this is some information can cover everyone, but in my experience, a lot of times it's sort of like the boy identified people who are called out in different ways and after crossing lines, and that's who I tend to see most of the time in my office. So I know I'm talking a little boy heavy, but when we have these conversations with whoever your kid is, like shooting for empathy, shooting for inclusivity, making sure that you are injecting your values into those conversations as much as you can so that your kids have a template with which to draw on. So when they're faced in a situation where like, I could repeat that joke or I could do that thing over there, like they have an idea, a litmus test that they can do. Like, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea? Some things, we want kids to figure out by trial and error. And some things can turn into a total stain when we let them figure it out by trial and error. And then I guess, one more bit of advice I say that comes up a lot is just being part of your kids' social media experience. Friend and follow each other. Check in about their social media just like you do with their homework or their friendships. Asking them about, what they're seeing and what they're doing on social media, just like we ask how their day was or how their date went. Just be part of your kids' online life. Those lines between our online life and our real life, like they don't really exist anymore, right? It's all included in each other, right? It folds in on each other. Our kids' online life is their real life. And so we really need to be remembering that and attending to that, just like we do their IRL stuff.
Right. And as you and I talk a lot about, we do a lot of presentations together about when your kids are first getting their cell phones, they're first getting social media, you're going to be like really close, right? You're going to be watching everything. As they get older, that's impractical in many ways, but you have to teach them so that you can start, letting out the rope and not being right there and trust that they're making good decisions. But you don't stop having the conversations. You got to keep talking about it, but You're not going to be as, you can't friend them on everything. Snapchat's a whole thing. so, but you have to still talk about it and teach them about how to deal with these things.
Yeah, and that's where the values part comes in,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't, I also get lots of calls and emails about social media from parents, and I'm like, you don't have to know the ins and out of every social media app that comes out there. It would be exhausting if you tried. What's important is communicating to your kids what you expect of them and what your family's values are, right? Because if you do a good enough job with that, then it doesn't matter if they're on TikTok or if they're on Snapchat or whatever new hell has not been invented yet, right? They know how to behave on there, right? And so, and they could cross those lines. We all have, right? Like everyone, every adult person has the thing that they did that they're kind of ashamed of or maybe embarrassed about, haven't been brave enough to tell their parents yet, probably aren't going to tell their kids about. Like everyone's done that thing, right? We just had the luxury of not having it videotaped and documented, right? And our kids don't really have that anymore. And so they're going to do stupid jackassy stuff and people are going to get hurt, and sometimes it's going to result in people being canceled, and it is hard to navigate, but it is navigatable.
We've been talking a lot about the side of the person who's getting canceled, but let's go over to the other side and talking to our kids about how they can respond if they see somebody who's done something that they see as racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or inappropriate online. How can we teach our kids to deal with it instead of let's take a screenshot, which the kids call receipts, right? Let's keep receipts on this and then let's send it around and cancel this person. Like what can we teach them about how to handle life?
So I think unfortunately part of the issue, especially in middle school, is it's a lot of kids kind of first dance out in the real world with each other, and it is an intriguing amount of power to be able to do that, right? And you can see it on social media all the time, right? I happen to personally love Karen videos, right? I can watch Karen videos all the time. I love them so much. But, and kids see that stuff too. And so it's really exciting to be like, oh, I'm making my own Karen video, right? I've never seen a Karen on my own in the wild, but I watched the videos, and I can see how that would be really exciting to kids, right? They've got like, oh, I've got this thing on you, this receipt, like Sherry said, and I can use it, right? And it makes them feel powerful. It's just reminding kids that it does feel powerful. I understand why you would want to do that. Is that really going to help the situation? And again, reminding them, like, doesn't passing that around actually just pass the person who was harmed's pain and just makes that go viral as well? Do we really want to do that? The most powerful thing a kid can do in that situation is to say something in the moment, right? Put your phone down, look at the person, stand up to them and say, that is not okay. Like what you're doing is wrong, it's hurtful, whatever words you want to use, and just, and be an upstander. Like we talk about with cyberbullying, right? And say what you're doing is not okay. That is the kind of stuff that makes more powerful change in the moment, right? And when I talk to kids, I talk to my own kids, right? I say, you got to be prepared. Like we are all going to be tasked with that at some point, right? There's going to be a situation at a party or in a Starbucks or the airport or wherever where someone is going to be doing something jackassy to another human. And are you going to be ready to step in whatever way is going to be helpful and help that person handle it? Not videotape and put on YouTube, but actually use your words, use your body, and do something about it in the moment. And be the kind of person that wants to make that kind of change. And so we can encourage our kids to do that rather than just create another Karen video. Will be a good thing. I'll have less Karen videos, but
what is their purpose? Is their purpose to humiliate and bring someone down, or is it to make change in the world?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it feels like justice when they're doing it, I think, but it doesn't always actually help.
And one thing that happened during the pandemic, our kids were bored, right? And so there was a lot of very purposeful cancel culture going on amongst some of the high schools. So what the kids were doing was they were kind of going back through people's Instagrams or receipts they had on their phone from people. And then they're like, aha, caught them. And then they would try to cancel this person, right? There was a lot of that going around. And the most extreme thing that I've heard teens doing is, if they have one of these videos or screenshots or something, is that when they find out where someone's going to college, that they'll actually forward it to that college and say, you shouldn't allow this person to go to college because of this particular video. So I found that very interesting, that it was a very aggressive form of cancel culture.
Yeah, because it's easy, right? I mean, it's 3 clicks of a button, and you've saved the day, right? Is kind of how they feel about it.
The power.
So yeah, it's about power, I think, and in a sense of justice for some people, but a lot of it's really easy for that sense of like, oh, there was a wrong and an injustice that I want to try to help fix, and that line between that and like revenge sometimes can get really thin.
Yeah, I wrote some words down before we started, and revenge was one of them. Yeah. Is this something that we're teaching our kids, to get revenge on people, or is it about social justice and change in the world?
When I talk to kids about it, like especially Gen Z, you know what I mean? Like their relationship with the world is really stressful, right? A lot of kids that I talk to, they feel kind of screwed over. They don't have a sense that anybody up there is going to be helping and taking care of them, right? Like the adults don't really care. This virus is still going on. Nobody's doing anything about gun violence. The earth is going to be ruined, and we're going to be left with it when everybody else is gone. Like they feel like they're handling it themselves, and that trickles down to like karma, right? Yeah. Like they don't necessarily trust that like a person who does something wrong is going to get their just desserts. We probably need to help make sure that happens, because nobody else is going to do it for us. And that's a real, I think, a core thing with Gen Z that we have helped create, and we have to kind of recognize in them, right? Getting them to trust that. How old is
Gen Z, Joe? What does Gen Z cover?
Oh, now you asked me, I'm going to be on the spot. So basically, Gen Z is like people born like after 2005-ish, right? So most of the kids we're talking about.
What's the upcoming generation? Like, is that Gen Z? I thought was a little older.
Oh, no. Is that... Yes, sorry, you're right. No.
But what are the new ones? Gen Alpha, somebody's saying. Thank you.
Gen Alpha, I think, is the growing term for the littles right now.
2010 plus is Gen Alpha.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Generations are roughly 15 years long. Got it. Okay. Yeah. It's crazy. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely this upcoming generation, especially with COVID and everything that is going on right now. I haven't yet seen what their personality is going to be like, right? I think is kind of right now is really just down in the dumps and hopeless. So I'm hoping we can turn that around and shift that around in the next few years.
Right. It's weirdly like the most anxious generation I think that's ever been on the planet. And they also are very aware that they are being tasked with sort of fixing a whole bunch of crap that everybody's leaving behind for them, from the planet to everything. So, this is a way that they're sort of practicing that skill of like taking matters into their own hands and fixing the situation. It's not very healthy and not really necessary, but I do appreciate that they are trying to do that. But instead of, whatever we can do to help our kids sort of not be one of those torch wielding villagers is probably going to be a good thing. They want to help. They want to do the right thing. I believe, I trust, right? For the most part, we just got to help them figure out what's the best way to do that. What's the most adult way to do that?
Yeah. I think like, if I think with my own kids, when things have come up on the internet and they bring it to me and say, oh my gosh, look what this person's saying, or they did, we'll always have a conversation about it, of what they want to do about it, if anything, what the wrong was, who are they hurting, so kind of the stuff you're talking about before they take any action. And sometimes the action is nothing, there's not really anything to do in the situation. Sometimes it's report it to the school, not like blast it on social media, but if it's important that the school knows, then take it to the school. Sometimes going directly to the person, as you were talking about, talking to them. And sometimes it's supporting the person that's kind of a target of something that's not so great going on, instead of going to the person that's doing the bad stuff, just to support them. There's so many ways that we can help our kids when things are going on online. And cancel culture, the accountability piece is fantastic, as you brought up, but we've got to get away from kind of defining people from these single moments, or dehumanizing them, if you will, that, it's still a person, still one of your
Right.
peers. They're still struggling like you are. And to see the human person behind the online post is really important for our kids.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Bill Cosby or Joe Rogan, who are clearly leaving like an obvious trail of repeated violations of our social contract, like that's one thing. But if you're 14 and you like screwed up and made a mistake, especially if you're 14 and you made the mistake 3 years ago, right? Like we need to be able to help create enough room for them to understand that they screwed up. How do you apologize and take accountability for it? And then what do you do going forward, and leave those breadcrumbs?
I want to ask, for those of you who are here with us tonight, if you can just put in the comments, if you have any questions. Usually we have it in the Q&A box. Wait, I see one there. But you can put them in the chat box. But if you want it to be anonymous, you can put it in the Q&A. Either way, we will get to your questions. And then I also want to know, in the chat box again, what your thoughts are on cancel culture in the high schools and middle schools, if you've seen it, or you've seen, it's affected your family. Let me see. There's a question here, but for some reason it's not coming up for me. 1 second. Let me see. Oh, Zoom, love you, but it's not acting right now.
Jerry, I can read it too if you guys can't see it.
Thank you. Yeah.
It says, I don't believe we can hold others accountable. We can only do this to ourselves. But how can we help our children recognize that?
Well, yeah, that's rough. I think that different people might go at that in different ways. So depending on, like your value system or how you view the world, I think some people definitely do think that. And I think other people think you can definitely hold other people accountable for stuff. So it sort of depends on sort of where you are on that continuum of attitude about what accountability is. And we live in America, like we kind of like holding people accountable, right? Like we've got our judicial system, and we're very litigious as a culture. I think we really like holding people accountable. And so, but in your family, like if you think like you can't hold other people accountable, you can only hold yourselves accountable. I actually think it's a great stance in this situation, because like Sherry said, oh, this thing happened. Okay, how are you feeling about it? What do you want to do about it? Like, what is your stance? And have it come from yourself rather than having it be about that person who did that terrible thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think, in this question, at first I was like, well, what does that mean? But when I think about it, it feels more like you can't change people. They can only change themselves. Maybe that's kind of along the lines of what you're thinking with accountability there. But I think there are things we can do to hold our kids accountable, right? I mean, that's where the consequences come in. And I think that we do have the ability to kind of, point it out to people. Like if Joe and I are talking and he says something really offensive, we say, hey, Joe, like, that's not cool. Like, why are you saying that? And that right there is holding somebody accountable, because I'm not just letting it go by. So I think that for me, I think you can't change people. They have to change themselves, but I think you can do things to hold them accountable. And maybe I think that because I'm a coach. So as a coach, that's what I do with my clients, is hold them accountable to what they say they're going to do from week to week, and show up and all that stuff. So yeah.
Well, as you know, I'm a therapist by trade, and so I definitely subscribe to the idea. Like you can't make anyone do anything. Like you have control of your responses and your choices, but you can't control other people in that sense. But at the same time, culturally, right? So like I said at the beginning, like the idea of canceling people or calling people out, boycotting things, like that's been around since the beginning of time, right? We were doing that as cave people, I think, probably. But what happened was Around 5-ish, 6-ish years ago, things changed, right? Like, I'm getting off on tangents, but like, I think technology has always been a vehicle for huge cultural change, right? And right now, social media is doing that. And what happened was the Me Too movement, right? Where for hundreds of years, it's been more shameful and keep it secret and don't talk about it if you're the person that had someone do a shitty thing to you, right? Mostly in terms of sexual assault. And then through the Me Too movement, which happened on social media, it has started to shift. And now it's actually more shameful to be the dude who did the shitty thing, right? They're the ones that are getting called out. They're the ones that are embarrassed, right? And the people who tend to be victimized are saying like, we're tired of hiding and keeping it a secret. Like, let's just talk about it and you can look like the jackass, right? And that's a very powerful thing. And I think, again, big picture as a society and a culture, that is going to help us sort of evolve into the next thing that we're supposed to be. Right. And doing that on social media is kind of fueling that, right? Like, you want to be a jerk in public? Great. Be a jerk in the middle of a Starbucks. And you can be, you're going to say that word out loud in public. Say that word out loud in public in capital letters all over YouTube. Good job. You lost your job, right? Like, people are doing that. And it does feel punishing, I think, but it does feel like people are being held accountable, and whatever that definition is working. But I think that is sort of encapsulates some of the vibe that's happening with this process.
Bonnie, I see another question, but again, I can't access it.
So this one is by the same person who is saying holding others accountable equals punishment, isn't it? So.
Yeah,
not necessarily.
In a lot of ways, I think it does for some people. I don't personally think that all the time, but I think that's how it plays out in public. Sherry, what were you gonna say?
And maybe not punishment all the time, although that's one way to hold people accountable, but also consequences, natural consequences, right? So you say something horrible, it goes viral, maybe you lose your friends, or maybe your friends, come to you and talk to you about it. So there's a natural progression of things that happen. But yeah, I mean, it just depends. That is one way to hold people accountable.
Yeah, consequences, right?
Yeah, and punishment might be one of those, right? Okay, any other questions? Let's see. What are the recommendations of offenses by individuals being protected by privacy rules within schools? The school claiming they will deal with it, but the parent not having any closure. So let's think about this one first. What are the recommendations, individuals? So protected by privacy rules. So I would think what you're probably talking about here is there's another kid in school that did something, maybe somebody videotaped them or not, and the school won't tell you much about it. I assume if you can just tell us if that's what you're talking about. Yes, okay. So then the school says they'll deal with it, but the parent doesn't have any closure. And probably, I'm assuming the parent doesn't have much information. So what do you do?
Just to understand, so like kid A did something, kid B or C or D sent it out, got them canceled, but you don't get to know who B, C, D were, or that sort of side of the story. Okay. All right. So I think, again, like, the best thing to do is focusing on your kid's behavior. That's really the only thing that you are going to have any influence on. There's been situations that I've seen where B and C and D also did something illegal that contributed to the situation, either in their response or as part of the issue and the problem. And sometimes we have control over that, and sometimes we don't have control over that if that narrative gets out. But I think the important thing is just focusing on your kid, like I said at the beginning, showing that you support them and that you will get through this with them is the most important part. Sometimes I think we don't really get closure, or we have to create our closure by how we handle it ourselves.
Right. Yeah, we can ask our kids, they'll tell us as much as they want to tell us, right? We can't force it out of them. But so many times we want to know all the details. One thing that comes to mind for me is, like, if there's a death threat at school, and they don't tell you a lot about it, and you're like, I want to know about this, right? It was on social media, like, but they're trying to protect the kid who's made a horrible mistake and they're trying to rectify it. But yeah, we can only control what's going on in our household, how we're supporting our kids. We can't always get all the information. And yeah, that's all we can do, support them. All right. Somebody else is asking, this is a complicated question, but it's a good one. So they haven't allowed their 14-year-old to have any social media. And she's asking, is that actually not helpful? Meaning she may not be able to make a viral mistake, but she also therefore can advocate for herself if something arises. I'll let you go first on that one.
She already knows what I'm going to say. I personally, I think that that's not always the best stance for all kids, right? Sherry's heard me say many times, I think at some point in a kid's middle school career is a good time to give them access to devices, start splashing around in social media, because they're young enough where they're going to listen to us. They still give a crap about what our values are. They're going to have those conversations with us, and then we'll help them learn how to be on social media. Whereas if we hold that back and don't let them have a smartphone until they're 17, that can feel like we're helping the kid. But then you end up with a 17-year-old who gets on social media for the first time. They don't want to listen to you anymore because they're 17 and they have no idea what they're doing. So they're going to see stuff that's going to freak them out. They're probably not going to come talk to you. They're going to talk to their friends and try to handle it that way, right? And so if kids can get that sooner, we can warn them and say, this kind of stuff happens. They can see something, shaka, and say like, what's going on in this situation? How do I handle this, right? And we can help them do that. And it toughens their skin, it gets them ready, and it can really help them in the long run, right? And so, yeah, they could cross a line and do something, but you'll also be there to help them fix it.
Right. Yeah. So I would say on this, it's not like, don't let your kids have social media ever. And I wouldn't say give your kids social media in 5th grade. And definitely they don't have to make some viral mistake to learn, because they can learn from other kids making viral mistakes. If your kid's not interested in it, it's not like you should get them on social media because they need to learn. Right. But if they are interested in it, don't make it this big taboo thing, because it's not going away. It's going to be there for the rest of their life and yours. And so, you know, what Joe's saying, teach them the ropes, like be there to guide them, to help them to deal with viral stuff, to deal with the things they see that they don't want to, and the dangerous memes that come across their feed. But
right. Yeah,
the later you start, media, the less they'll listen.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, social media is social media is gonna be around for them a lot longer than we are, right? So if we can help them learn how to do it and do it well when they still want to listen to us, like that's what parenting is now, right? Like helmets, seatbelts, sunscreen, good digital citizenship. That's our job, to teach them that. And yeah, so somebody said, like, does that mean we have to be on there too? Yeah, it kind of does, right? Like, yeah. You want your kid to learn how to drive, you get in the car with them. You want your kid to learn how to behave in a restaurant, you take them to the restaurant. You want your kid to know what they're doing and be safe on social media, get your ass on social media, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to be on every platform, because there's no way you can keep up with your kids on their platforms they're on.
But it's a really great window into their world. Like you're connected to them in a really, sometimes inane, but sometimes really sweet ways.
Exactly. Right. It's already 8 o'clock, Joe. I can't believe we could talk about this forever. Before all of you leave, I'd love to ask you in the chat box to put something that kind of stood out for you tonight. It's helpful for Joe and it's helpful for me to know what resonated with you. And we'll be collecting those so that we can learn from all of you. And I appreciate your time here. I do want to share one thing, and Joe, don't go yet, because I need to officially say thank you to you for taking your time here. But I wanted to share something that's going on next week. It is a webinar. I don't know if you can see that. You should be able to. It's a masterclass I'm doing next Thursday on how to speak your teen's love language. This is good for tweens, teens, whatever age really. But as they start pushing us away, we have to kind of tell them that we love them in different ways. So it's just a 1 hour class that I'm doing next week free. for all of us to stay connected to our kids, which is not always easy.
That's excellent. And I on this topic, like I'm sure Sherry will cover this, but like a lot of your kids love languages, and a great way to stay connected with them, especially when they leave the nest at some point, is social media, right?
Oh, yes.
So that's great.
Yeah, my kids are, my youngest is in college now. We're sending all sorts of memes and texts and all sorts of things to each other, TikToks, fun stuff. All right. So Joe, thank you so much. This was enlightening as always, and lots for us to think about as parents. And we'll be putting, for everyone who's here, we're going to be putting in the Facebook group some of these things that Joe taught us. So we'll put them in a cute infographic so we can have those to refer back to. And I really appreciate your time. Learned a lot from you, Joe.
Sure. I always love this. Thanks, Sherry. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sherry, can we launch a really quick poll? We're curious to know if this is your first parent chat or if you've been here a few times. If you could, as you go, answer this really quick poll, that'd be awesome. And the last thing I just want to mention really briefly is we're going to continue doing these parent chats through the rest of the year. And the next two coming up in 2 weeks on Wednesday night will be mental wellness across cultures. So yeah, we'll be looking at the one size doesn't fit all when it comes to what mental health means. And then on March 9th, it's going to be Well Body, Well Minds. We'll be looking at the physical underpinnings of mental health and mental well-being, you know, get a good night's sleep and eat a good diet. And we're just learning a lot about how the body really does affect mental health. And we want to share that with parents as well. And then the last one is going to be youth susceptibility to extremism, online extremism, what parents need to know. So that's the lineup for the rest of the winter session.
That will be a fascinating one. So we're going to hang out in the chat box for a little bit. If you have other questions or something, we can answer them in there. We'll just type it out. But thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you at the next parent chat.